Do we honestly need new laws to purportedly offer more protection for home buyers when the existing ones are adequate? Would amending the Housing Development Act Control and Licensing Act 1966 and their related regulations honestly solve the problem of abandoned housing projects? There's nothing wrong with the current law. The million-dollar question is, how many wayward housing developers have been prosecuted with so many abandoned projects littered in Malaysia? In this episode, I would like to dwell on the issue titled Lack and Lux in Enforcement Program Weakens Our House Buyers Entitlement. Time and again, every Minister of Housing desires to tweak and fine-tune the housing laws, claiming to champion more protection and safeguard for home buyers as if it's customary to do so. Now this time around, the immediate past Malaysian Housing and Local Government Minister Yang Berhormat Dato' Haji Zuraida Kamaluddin has been reported to propose a fund purportedly to revive abandoned projects. If such a rehabilitation fund is set up, wouldn't house prices be increased proportionately, since the housing developers will always factor in the increase to their house prices? Wouldn't the setting of a proposed fund allow developers to be reckless in launching new projects? Now, the current Housing Development Control and Licensing Act 1966 HDA has already been revamped and implemented since June 1st, 2015 to plug some of the loopholes and rectify inadequacy and even some questionable and grey clauses that existed in the original act. The procedures for control and licensing of housing developers were made more stringent so that non-bona fide developers would be reduced, if not eradicated. Let me elaborate on the new stringent rules and safety nets that are currently under the HDA. Criminalizing abandonment. Now, the pertinent amendment to the HDA were on the issues of criminalizing abandonment. This new amendment makes it a crime for housing developers to abandon their projects. The new Section 18A states that any licensed housing developers who abandons or causes to be abandoned a housing development or any phase of a housing development which the licensed housing developer is engaged in, carries on, undertakes, or causes to be undertaken shall be guilty of an offence and shall on conviction be liable to a fine which shall not be less than 250,000 ringgit but which shall not exceed 500,000 ringgit or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years or to both. However, since its enactment in 2015, there has not been any news, not a single case of developer being prosecuted under this new section. Although cases of abandonment abound, enforcement is still the key on whether the law is effective in protecting property buyers. I'd like to talk about the deposit of 3% on construction costs in the housing development account. Now, Section 6, bracket 1, bracket B, condition or restriction for a grant of a developer's license was enhanced to make the requisite deposit refundable from the then 200,000 ringgit to 3% of the construction cost. As to whether the 3% deposit will curb abandonment, our contention is that it will indirectly reduce such instances. Those developers, aspirants who are financially so weak that they are not able to raise 3% deposit, it is refundable anyway, should stay out of the industry because the probability of them running into trouble is higher. The increase in the finance cost in order to fork out the 3% is negligible when measured against the potential gross development value. Furthermore, any additional cost, interest, is only incurred during the construction phase because upon project completion, the 3% is fully refunded by the Controller Housing. However, the effectiveness of the Revamp Act remains to be seen, if it only reflects its effectiveness after a period of time. However, we reiterate that much depends on the degree of enforcement to be carried out. Although the law has been implemented for over 6 years, we are still witnessing the abandoned projects.
Are you serious?
Deadly serious!
Where is the protection from the defunct developers? Don't they know that abandoned housing projects are the biggest nightmare to house buyers? The Housing Ministry is the guardian of the housing legislation that was passed by Parliament. Yet, how do we account for the surmounting problematic housing projects? It's not that the ministry does not have the law. It's this sheer lack and lax in enforcement. Our fundamental belief is that even the best of legislation to counter a particular situation would just remain as ornamental piece unless strict enforcement is carried out against the offenders without fear or favor, so as to instill into them the respect, a fearful feeling that the law commands. Let's look at some of the existing stringent rules and the safety nets that are already within the existing law. Section 7A, duties to maintain HDA account. The licensed housing developer shall not withdraw any money from the housing development account except authorized under the regulation. Any housing developers who contravene or fail to comply with this section shall be guilty of an offence. Next, we have Section 7C, freezing of the account. If the controller have any reasons to believe that the licensed housing developer is carrying on the business in a manner detrimental to the interest of purchaser, blah 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 blah. Even with the HDA account, there's a need for measures in preventing misappropriation of buyers' money. We are wondering whether the safety net has ever been cast up to salvage the failing project. The question is, how many of these defaulting developers have been prosecuted? Thirdly, we have Section 7, duties of a licensed housing developer. This is under Section 7F that the developer must biannually submit their quarterly report. This biannual report has now been enhanced further to include quarterly report. If this has been constantly and effectively monitored by the minister and those under his charge with qualified personnel, symptoms of sickness of a failing housing project would have been diagnosed. But abandoned projects still keep reoccurring. Does it not mean that there is a lack in supervisory role via Form 7F? Fourthly, we have got Section 10A, power of entry, search and seizure. Now this section was copied and blocked from the Income Tax Act and was included in the HDA Act, amended in the year 2002. But has this section been invoked to instill fear to the spine of those errant developers? If so, how do you account for those recalcitrant and repeat offenders? It cannot possibly be that the ministry is shy of publicity by not highlighting its achievement to the mass media. Fifthly, we got Section 11, power of minister to give directions for the purpose of safeguarding the interests of purchaser. Here, it is too long for me to read. You'll be on my video later to be displayed. Stories of developers falling sick and becoming incapable of continuing with their housing projects are not something new. Properties buyers are the biggest victim in such instances, but what possibly could they do? Under Section 10 of the HDA, it is stipulated that the minister may direct a controller or an inspector to make investigation under condition of secrecy, investigate the commission of any offence under this act, or investigate into the affairs of or into the accounting or other records of any housing developers. If he has reasons to believe, ada sebab untuk mempercayai that the housing developer in question is carrying on his business in a manner detriment to the purchaser, menjalankan kegiatan yang memudaratkan kepentingan pembeli, or has assets insufficient to meet his liabilities atau sudah jatuh sakit. This section is further enhanced and amplified with the inclusion of Section 11, Section 10A, power entry and search, and all these sections as we earlier referred. The minister and his ministry has wide-ranging power to intervene and salvage a sick and problematic project and to offer treatment to provide cure. Yet, look at the number of abandoned projects which emerge, a dire financial picture for the naive and innocent buyers. Individuals and community are being harmed by the lax in enforcement and monitoring mechanism. The public relying on the legislation is often let down by the enforcers. It's only good on paper and it will continue to remain in our archives unless the existing law are used to their full capacity. The problem of abandoned housing project is not because of the lack of laws. Do we honestly need new laws to purportedly offer more protection for house buyers when the existing ones are adequate? Or is the government blaming the insufficient tool vis-a-vis housing laws? Let's face it, there's no solution for abandoned projects. We just have to prevent it from happening. Could preemptive measures be adopted and enforcement organized to avoid future abandonments? Your guess is as good as mine. As the saying goes, prevention is better than cure, because it is too late now to close the stable doors after the horses have bolted. Question 1, Dato' Chang. I wish you better luck to buy into an apartment and has been declared as abandoned. We have to continue to service the interest to the bank, especially where the bank has progressively released the housing loan of 65%. Got no roof to shelter my family, but must continue to pay rent to my landlord. Our future plan has been screwed up and uncertain. Question 2, Dr. Chang. The Ministry of Housing says that my apartment is still categorized as sick project and has not been declared as abandoned as yet. It has been sick for the last 6 years and is well beyond its scheduled completion date, that is August 2015. How many more years do you expect me and my family to wait and suffer? Question 3, Dr. Chang. I am a victim of abandoned housing project in Kuala Lumpur. What should us buyer do? One of the greatest injustice is to end up being a victim of an abandoned housing project. It is traumatic experience having to endure a situation when you place your entire saving to own a home, only to discover that the house never got completed, and worse, you still have to service the bank loan. A total of 187 abandoned private housing projects was recorded in Peninsular Malaysia. Some are as old as 1997, while the new ones are declared by the Housing Minister as abandoned as recent as 6th of November 2019. You may want to visit the Ministry of Housing and Local Government website at www.kpkt.gov.my for the Sinarai Pemaju Project Perumahan Swasta terbengkalai sehingga 16 Ogos 2021. These statistics do not even include projects by the government or the agencies that have been abandoned. The havoc created by victims of failed housing projects is a widespread national issue. Look at the number of abandoned housing projects and the number of buyers affected and left in the lurch to fend for themselves. This is not only unfair, it is downright unacceptable and disgusting. How do we expect those who are directly facing such a situation to stomach it while those developers go scot-free? And yet, we pride ourselves as a caring society with a caring government. Is their mentality. Always blame the law and not themselves. Enough of the fuming and disgust over the issue. The affected buyers should galvanize themselves together as a group. We recommend the formation of a working committee to spearhead the group. Without the few interested and dedicated buyers in any project to spearhead the forming of a committee, the probability of getting anywhere when dealing with issues would be slow or nothing. A united group with a common interest generates a synergy that equips you to better resolve outstanding issues. Together, buyers have the advantage of numbers. Even political pressure can be generated because, as the saying goes, politics is a game of numbers. In this instance, the formation of a working committee is important for the following reasons. 1. To have a cohesive voice in the interest of the affected buyers in dealing with the developer as well as the authority. 2. To organize when there is a need for contact and communication and to coordinate meetings. 3. To share the workload should there be a need for sharing of a task. 4. To share resources to maintain and improve the strength of the group. 5thly, to safeguard your interests and that of all the affected buyers and to carry out the wishes of the majority and to put it in effect the resolutions and the action plan. And of course, to act as a watchdog on future events that follows. The crucial step is to write to Ketua Setiausaha Kementerian Perumahan dan Kerajaan Tempatan and to the Director General DG Jabatan Perumahan Negara JPN under the Ministry of Housing and Local Government at www.kpkt.gov.my for them to arrange a meeting between the developers, their architect, and representative from the local council meaning MPSJ, MPPJ, DBKL. They are the authorities who approve the plans and who issues the development order with the buyer's representative group. The meeting should be chaired by the Director General of JPN because they are the agency that issues the developer's license and they are the guardian of Housing Development Act HDA and would be the position to seek solution to the dilemma of the victims. Remember, good dialogue and careful advanced planning among owners will go a long way towards resolving their issues. Affected owners, after forming a group, could approach HBA for guidance and advice. Our email is at info@hba.org.my. Don't come to us if the affected owners have not taken initiative to form a working group. Thank you for your excellent question. My next talk will be on abandonment. One abandoned housing project far too many. And way forward with our proposed hybrid BTS 1090 concept, build then sell 10:90 concept. See you in the next episode.